When we think of rulers and their women, the first thing that comes to mind are the Sultan's harems from Magnificent Century, right? Intrigue, luxury, the fight for the master's attention. But let's travel east to the forbidden city of the Chinese emperors. And let me tell you, compared to what went on there, many harems would look like a kindergarten. Life for the women in the chambers of a Chinese emperor was, on one hand, a bit simpler, but on the other, terrifyingly, unimaginably worse. Today, we're going to talk about things that will make your blood run cold, about what it was really like to be one of the thousands of women in the private quarters of the Son of Heaven. So, by tradition, the emperor could only have one principal wife, the Empress. She was the center of his domestic universe. But that didn't mean the emperor was a one-woman man, not at all. Below the Empress there was a whole pyramid of concubines, actresses, musicians, and servants. And just to give you a sense of the scale, the Empress alone had up to 10 attendants. A high-ranking concubine had about 7, a mid-level one had 5, and the lowest had only 1 or 2. At certain points in history, the Forbidden City, aptly named the Purple Forbidden Enclosure, could house up to 20,000 women at once. Just think about that number. 20,000. Of course, with such a multitude of potential partners, strict protocols were needed to prevent the emperor from, let's say, overexerting himself. And this is where it gets really interesting. The ruler could meet his principal wife, the Empress, for intimacy about once a lunar month. But a high-ranking concubine could be summoned to him several times in that same period. Strange, isn't it? You'd think the main wife would get more attention. But the logic, in the spirit of ancient philosophy, was ironclad. The Empress was believed to be the embodiment of pure female energy, yin. To conceive an heir, minimal contact with the male energy, yang, was thought to be sufficient. Concubines, on the other hand, were seen as having diluted energy, so more attempts were required for the same result. The irony is staggering. The lower your status, the more time you spent with the emperor. Can you even imagine the struggle for attention in this kingdom of women? Conspiracies, alliances, betrayals. The backroom politics in the Forbidden City were so brutal that the first emperor of the Ming dynasty had to issue a special decree. The principal wife had no right to tyrannize junior concubines and servants. Apparently, there had been precedents. Every evening summons to the emperor's chambers followed the strictest protocol. But let's set aside the intrigue. The ritual itself is something else. The instruction manual for an antique musket would seem like a child's puzzle compared to how a night with the emperor was orchestrated. And who managed this whole process? Eunuchs. Yes, it was castrated men who held more power in the women's quarters than any concubine, even the most beloved. Here's how it worked. The choice. In the evening, a special eunuch would come to the chosen woman with a token, a sign of the imperial will. Preparation. The woman was completely undressed, anointed with perfumes, and left naked. This wasn't for erotic purposes, but for security, to ensure she couldn't hide a dagger or poison in her clothes. Delivery. Another eunuch would wrap her in a cloak of eagle feathers. Yes, you heard that right. Carry her on his shoulders to the emperor's bedroom and remove the cloak. The woman then had to slide under the covers to the emperor's feet. And you know what? They weren't even left alone in the bedroom. During the Ming dynasty, the emperor's mother or the chief eunuch would often be present in the room to offer advice as things progressed. A special scribe would sit in a corner and record all the details of the night in red ink. These notes later formed the basis of classic Chinese treatises on the art of love. By the Qing dynasty, things got a little easier. The overseers waited outside the door, but there was still a catch. A concubine could not stay in the emperor's bed until morning. At a certain point, the chief eunuch would approach the door and shout loudly, "Time is up!" If there was no response, he would shout again, and again, until the door opened. And now, for the grand finale. After a night of love, as the emperor emerged from his chambers, pleased with life, the eunuch would ask him the key question: keep or release? He was talking about the imperial seed. If the emperor said keep, a note was made in a special ledger. Such and such concubine on such and such a date was granted the imperial favor. This served as proof of paternity in case of pregnancy. But if he answered release, the eunuch would find the concubine and apply strong pressure to specific points on her abdomen to get rid of everything that had entered her. No entry was made in the book, of course. Only his principal wife could be visited by the emperor without these ceremonies, but even then, everything was documented. If there was no intimacy, the emperor would say, "Leave," and no record was made. If it happened, the scribe would note, "On this date, at this hour, the Son of Heaven graced the Empress with potential." In their free time, the lives of these women might seem like a fairy tale. They studied art and music, lived in luxury, and received a generous allowance. But this fairy tale ended quickly. With age, many of them, even high-ranking ones, were turned into ordinary servants, washing linen, cleaning, cooking, raising silkworms, and dyeing fabrics. But even that wasn't the worst part. Behind the glittering facade lay a reality that chills the blood. A woman could simply be thrown out of the Forbidden City if she lost her beauty, proved to be infertile, or committed some offense. And you know what? That was considered a merciful outcome. Many took their own lives. Poisons were forbidden. The entire family could be executed for it. So they chose other ways. Slow starvation, or, if they were lucky, throwing themselves into a well or swallowing a gold or tin leaf to suffocate. Those who fell out of the emperor's favor or were disgraced fell under the complete control of the eunuchs. These men, deprived of their masculinity but not their desires, vented their frustrations on the defenseless women. They could beat them, bite them, humiliate them, and even kill them with no consequences. But death wasn't the worst fate. The most terrible thing was to be maimed. In ancient China, any scar on a woman's body was a final verdict. Outside the palace walls, she had no chance of a normal life. Such a tainted blossom, as they were called, was doomed to face only contempt, poverty, and oblivion. Think it can't get any worse? It can. Under the rule of Emperor Jiajing of the Ming dynasty, the ruler could beat a concubine to death simply for his own amusement. His eunuchs, following his example, killed those they disliked. The slightest offense was met with a brutal flogging, which was often fatal. Records show that during Jiajing's reign, no fewer than 150 women died this way. At the time, about 3,000 women and 2,000 eunuchs lived in his palace. The men, of course, took food from the weak, so death by starvation was commonplace, and at some point, the cup of patience overflowed. On November 8, 1542, a group of palace maids attempted the unthinkable, to assassinate the emperor. That night, they threw a rope around the sleeping Jiajing's neck and began to tighten it. He was saved by a miracle. In their haste, they tied a faulty knot that didn't cinch. The emperor was able to move and resist. His wife, alerted by the commotion, rushed in and saved the Son of Heaven. The revenge was horrific. The ringleader and her collaborators, more than 10 people, were executed by lynchi, death by 1,000 cuts, a slow dismemberment. Their remains were displayed on stakes as a warning. The conspirators' families also suffered. Several dozen people were executed, and the rest were sold into slavery. So that's the other side of life in a golden cage. A story not of love and luxury, but of survival, despair, and the terrible price women paid for proximity to power.